The Secret of the Indian by Lynne Reid Banks. Chapter 18, Red Satin. Help! Get me down! Save me! I'm gonna fall! Help! How did he... never mind. Quick, we must do something. Boone, hang on, we're coming. How? He squawked. Y'all ain't got wings. I can't hold on much longer. It's no use. His voice swooped into a despairing dirge. Don't bother none, fellas. It's too late to save me. I'm doomed. I accept my fate. I just wish I hadn't lived such a rotten, no-good, hard-drinking, poker-playing life. Once again, Emma was the first to react sensibly. The boys were running around in circles under the dangling cupboard, bumping into each other as their hopeless search for something to climb on. Emma tore off her parka and thrust one sleeve into Omri's hand and one into Patrick's. Then, grasping the bottom edge herself and pulling it taut like a fireman's blanket, she shouted up, Let go! We'll catch you! Boone let go and dropped what must have seemed to him like 1,000 feet, screaming all the way. Ow! He hit the quilting with a tiny plop and lay there, momentarily stunned. Emma and the boys laid the parka gently on the floor. Boone, are you okay? Asked Patrick anxiously. After a moment, Boone slowly sat up. That's all I needed, he remarked bitterly, wincing as he felt himself all over. As if that wasn't enough to lose my hat and get crushed half to death by my best buddy. He gave Patrick a dirty look. I get blown almost up to the pearly gates, and instead of finding myself on a nice soft pink cloud, I'm hanging out there in space yelling my head off with not a living soul taking a danged bit of notice till it's nearly too late. And he wiped away a tear. He scowled around darkly and then changed his tone. Say, what hit this place anyhow? Must have been some dynamiting that went wrong. It was a cyclone from your town and from your time, Boone. It came back with me through the magic, Patrick explained. Boone looked appalled. Say, I hope it didn't wreck the saloon. If the cyclone came here, it couldn't be there at the same time. So I guess your town's safe. By the way, so is your hat. Boone's whole manner changed. He jumped to his feet excitedly. You found my hat? I sure miss it. It's okay, Boone. It's back there waiting for you. Ruby Lou made sure to pick it up safely. She knows you love it. Boone stared at him. You run into Ruby? Patrick nodded. Boone's eyes began to glow. You don't say. Now, ain't she a great gal? Yes, she is. She ain't one of your prissy, stuck-up kind neither. She's a real pal, and purty as paint, too. He heaved a wishful sigh. I wished she was here now. You know, he confided, when I'm with Ruby, I never feel sad nor nothing, and I only cry 'cause she kind of likes me to tell her sad stories, and I can do without drinking. That little Ruby gal is as good as liquor to a man any day. Better. That's the nicest thing a man ever said to me, Billy Boone. The sound of this other tiny voice was so totally unexpected they all goggled at each other before turning toward it. They stared unbelievingly, standing up on the edge of the bit of chest lid that Henri had dropped, was a tiny figure in a red satin dress and high-polished red boots, with blonde hair piled on her head and her hands on her hips. Patrick let out a yell of delight. Ruby, what are you doing here? Search me, but the tables are turned now, eh, Pat? Now you're the biggin', but I don't care so long as Billy's my size. Who's going to bring me over to him so he can give me a hug? The boys dived, but Emma got there first. She took the tiny figure of Ruby Lou in her hand, wonderingly, and gazed at her. Then she lifted a shining face to Omri. She's mine. She's my red girl. I sneaked her into the seed tray just before you put it into the chest. Isn't she just beautiful? Ain't she, though? Echoed Boone adoringly, as Emma gently set her down on the parka at his side, and they fell into each other's arms. The freak storm was an absolute disaster for nearly everyone it touched. But for Omri, Patrick, and Emma, and for the little people, it was a godsend in one way. The destruction it wreaked on Omri's home and the neighborhood was so extensive that what had gone just before was simply dislodged from the minds of the grown-ups. To begin with, Mr. Johnson's precious car was a total write-off. To make matters worse, or better, just as he was jumping up and down beside it, ranting and raving at its destruction, a sizable branch from the dead elm broke off and descended on his head. After that, of course, though he recovered later, nobody was about to believe any tales he had to tell about little live men. Incidentally, the insurance company refused to pay up for the porch because cyclones were excluded in the small print. He would have to come to school on a bicycle, a sadder and humbler man. As for Omri and Patrick's parents, they'd never exactly believed what Mr. Johnson tried to tell them just before they came rushing up the stairs, and afterwards they simply never remembered it. The controversy had blown to pieces. The tree was blocking the road. Their chimney had fallen through the roof next door. The whole place looked as if a cyclone had struck it. There was no time even to think about anything else, once they had made sure their children were really all right. The storm had severely damaged the school, which was closed for several weeks. This naturally caused all those who should have been learning there profound unhappiness, but they managed to make the best of things. Patrick's cottage in Kent was okay, but his mother's orchard, she had taken to cider making for a living since her divorce, had been devastated. The problems this caused meant she was only too glad to leave Patrick up in London for a time while she dealt with them. She never did get around to asking him where he had been during that fateful 24 hours when he was missing. So all that was on the plus side, at least from the point of view of the secret. On the minus side were the condition of Omri's house, his parents' distress, and one other thing that loomed larger for him than the other two, not to mention Boone and Ruby than anything else. As soon as possible, Omri got a ladder and unhooked the cupboard, impaled through its back on the broken roof joist. He took a hammer and carefully flattened the bent bits of metal into place until the hole was almost concealed. He measured the space for the mirror and went out and brought another to match and fitted it in. He fixed the hinges and gave the whole thing a rub-down with sandpaper and repainted it, after which it looked a good deal better than it ever had before. But all the time he was working on it, his heart was leaden, and Patrick and Emma, when they could be there, said very little. Each knew all too well what was in the minds of the others. What Omri so diligently, so devotedly working on was merely a museum piece. The cupboard was of no practical use without the key, and the key was gone. Emma had taken over Ruby Lou, and since Ruby refused to be parted from him, Boone stayed with Patrick, who was living in Emma's house with his aunt. Omri was utterly opposed to this, but he couldn't say much. The little people had hardly been proved safe in his place, but he lived in abject terror of Tamsin or someone else finding out. Omri was having to share Guillaume's room, so in a way he was glad not to have the responsibility of the little people, but there was cold terror in his heart nearly every waking moment, even though Emma and Patrick assured him they were taking every precaution. It was evident to Omri that despite the dangers, or perhaps because of them, the other two were having the greatest fun of their lives. Ruby and Boone were living in an old doll's house of Emma's, which, if not quite small enough for them, they had to really climb up the stairs and come down backwards, contained plenty of things they could use, tables, chairs, beds, and kitchen gadgets galore. What the doll's house didn't provide, Patrick and Emma did. Patrick had fixed them up with a little wooden stove, complete with stovepipe, and made of a tea tin that had a hole on top, of the right size for a real tiny frying pan, and with this Ruby Lou could do some cooking. They used a special little loo, like a camping one, which Emma had arranged, and every day she brought them hot water for baths and tiny towels. Boone got almost to like washing. Every day there were new things to make and add. They even rigged up real electric lights that were a wondrous novelty for Boone and Ruby, though the switch was too stiff for them to work alone, and they really preferred a miniature, but real oil lamp twice as tall as themselves. All this was fine for everyone but Omri. He felt very much alone and left out. Visiting occasionally and seeing for himself only made him sadder. He longed for Little Bear and bright stars to keep him